How can we celebrate Purim when everything is so messed up at the moment? This terrible war going on here in Israel, enormous suffering of our own people and among the Palestinians, Jews around the world suffering from terrible anti-Semitism. Is this really the right time for parties and dressing up and getting drunk? Well, actually, I believe it is, and I'm going to explain why. And I'm going to start by saying that Rabbi Nachman of Breslov taught, as understood by his students, that actually Purim is the new beginning that Pesach once was, meaning everything, he said, used to begin from Pesach, but now it begins from ... and his students filled in the gap, Purim. Everything now begins from Purim. How is Purim a beginning? It's in the final month of the year, whereas Pesach is in Nisan, which is in the Torah the first month of the year. So how do we begin at the end? Well, it's the perfect way to prepare for Pesach and deepen it, and I'm going to explain a little bit one way how we can understand that. So let's look at the story of Pesach. We're slaves to a cruel Pharaoh in Egypt, and God performs the plagues and takes us out. And then what happens? We're attacked by the Amalekites who reappear in the Purim story. We win, we overcome, then we get the Torah. Then we go through the difficult period in the wilderness where we're kind of growing up from being babies, from being born at Pesach time, from being born in the Exodus. We're going through like our childhood and adolescence in the wilderness. Then we go into the land of Israel. We get taken in, not under Moses, he dies, Joshua takes us in. And it's a tricky period. There are lots of wars and conflicts and tests and trials and tribulations, but the general trajectory is clearly all positive. Eventually, after a few hundred years, we build the temple, and eventually we have a golden age under King David and then his son King Solomon. The trajectory is all very positive. Now, after King Solomon, things start to go downhill. The kingdom splits in two, and we're headed towards what is we know as the first exile. The destruction of the first temple and the first Jewish commonwealth by the Babylonians leads to the first exile. People at the time, the Jewish people at the time, did not think that was possible. They were living in the Jewish commonwealth with the temple under King David and then King Solomon and then under the other kings that came after, and they felt such immediate connection to the source of life, to our tradition, to the rituals performed in the temple, that even though their society was one with many problems and even idolatry was rampant, and that was one of the reasons the temple was destroyed, even though that was also true, they felt that there was no way that God would destroy the temple and destroy their commonwealth, that they would be punished in that way, because they felt so connected to the divine. Well, they were wrong. The Babylonians came, destroyed the temple, destroyed the commonwealth, led many of the people to ancient Babylonia as slaves. Now, the people, when they got there, were in not only sadness and dismay that it had happened, but they were actually in a kind of deep existential despair, because the whole story and trajectory of the Jewish people up to that point had all been moving in a positive direction. And suddenly, the story and the mission of the people had been derailed in a way they didn't think was possible. Well, that is how far Pesach got us. Pesach got us all the way from being slaves in Egypt to getting the Torah, to going into the land, to the first commonwealth. But then it all seemed to fall apart. The people didn't have a story. They didn't have a narrative that worked from that point on. So Purim comes in. Purim happens in our timeline during the Babylonian exile. Purim comes along when we're in darkness, we're in despair. God is hidden. God is not mentioned in the story of Purim in Megillah Esther. God is not there at all, apparently, unless we try really, really hard to see God and to relate to God, even in the midst of that darkness. And so Purim comes along. And this is, I believe, one way of understanding what Rabbi Nachman was trying to say. Purim is now the new beginning, because we need a new beginning that is deeper than the new beginning of Pesach, in order that Pesach can really work. And we actually see this in the Purim story. It doesn't say in the Megillah, but it says so in the commentaries on the Megillah from our ancient rabbis. It says that the days that Esther fasted, and then the days of Esther's feast, when she invited the king and Haman to her feast, which was the crucial pivot point in the story in overthrowing Haman's plan, that all happened during the beginning of Pesach, actually during Seder night, during the night when Jews around the world have always, every year since our tradition began, gathered to tell the story of leaving Egypt. Well, that year they didn't have a regular Seder. that year they were fasting. All the Jews were fasting so that Esther would be successful, and Esther was fasting, and she asked everyone else in Shushan to fast, all the Jews to fast for her and with her, so that she would be successful in her mission. What does that mean? It means that year, and this teaching came to me via Rabbi Shunda. He said it like this, I believe. Yeah, this is how I heard him say it, that they reset Pesach. By that year not doing Pesach in the way that it's normally done, they reset it. They did a even deeper fixing of the opportunity of the new beginning of Pesach, which then meant that from that point on, the whole story of our people, the whole calendar, the whole system of our way of life was infused with a much deeper meaning, because we had found out for ourselves what it means to find God, to find the source of life, to find the infinite one, and to find meaning and purpose and hope even in darkness and existential despair. Remember, they were in exile, which they didn't think was possible. We know now there's multiple exiles, and we come out of them all. But they didn't know that then. They were in the first one, and they found that hope. And maybe that's also one layer of meaning, of one way of understanding what the rabbis mean when they say in the Talmud, the Jewish people accepted the Torah on Purim more deeply than they did on Mount Sinai. How could that be? Well, because at Mount Sinai, they just came out of Egypt, all these miracles were being done, and the smoke and the lightning and the thunder, and everything was so overwhelming for them. But at Purim, they had to try really hard in the darkness to see it, to try and see it, and make a choice with real freedom. May we be blessed to see the best possible things, to see things which are not so good, inverted, please God, flipped into good things, and to be our best possible selves, to dress up as our best possible selves, and so a little bit to bring into the world those qualities and to actually become our best possible selves. And may we grow towards a Pesach, a true liberation that's even deeper. Now we know that the liberation of Pesach also goes beyond any obstacle we will ever overcome. Purim Sameach.